Hey everyone, David Chen here. Let's talk about Palm Springs, which just hit Hulu in the United States. Before we go further, I do want to say I'm probably going to be spoiling everything from the movie Palm Springs. So if you don't want to know what happens in the movie, go check out the movie, come back, watch this video. I do want to say I really encourage you to check it out. It's one of my favorite movies of 2020. So watch the movie, spoilers from here on out. Palm Springs is directed by Max Barbakow and written by Andy Ciara. It's sold at Sundance this year for around $17 million, which was a pretty big deal and still is a pretty big deal. It tells the story of two wedding guests, Andy Samberg and Kristen Milioti, who are trapped in a time loop and need to contend with both getting out of that time loop as well as their feelings for each other at the same time. It's a romantic comedy in the vein of Groundhog Day, and I realized as I was watching it that it's pretty rare to have a straight up romantic comedy that uses the time loop mechanic. Because generally, when you have a time loop mechanic, it's like one person trapped inside the time loop. It's not two people. But in recent years, we actually have seen time loop movies that have multiple people trapped inside the time loop. I'm thinking of like Happy Death Day 1 and 2, Russian Doll, and also Edge of Tomorrow, kind of, although they were trapped in time loops at different points in time. Overall, I think Palm Springs is hugely enjoyable. Andy Samberg and Kristen Milioti have awesome chemistry together. It's sweet, it's touching, and more importantly, what I want to talk about today is how it innovates on the time loop genre. Of course, one of the most popular time loop movies, the movie that helped to popularize the genre, maybe to create the genre, is Harold Ramis's classic 1993 film Groundhog Day, starring Bill Murray as Phil Connors. In Groundhog Day, Phil Connors is trapped in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, in a day that continues to repeat itself, and he needs to redeem his own soul in order to find his way out. And that's generally what the time loop genre does, is people are kind of trapped, they interpret what they're in as some kind of purgatory, and they need to do some set of actions to get themselves out. Time loop movies become very existential. In almost every single time loop movie, there's always some scene where a character loses hope in their situation because they don't think that they can advance forward in their life, in human history, in time. And it's interesting to think about how Palm Springs fits into some of these other movies. One of Palm Springs' big innovations is that you meet the character going through the time loop after he's already been in the time loop for a really, really long time. Typically, time loop movies start you as the protagonist and you're kind of following them as they discover they're in a time loop. Palm Springs is like, no, you've already seen enough time loop movies. We don't need to go through all that again. We're just going to meet this guy after he's been in this loop for what seems to be many, many decades. He's already over it, and he can explain to Kristen Milioti's character, Sarah, what exactly is going on. This can create some really interesting interpersonal dynamics, like in this movie, for example, Andy Samberg's character Niles lies to Sarah about the fact that they haven't slept together, and then later on reveals that he's lying, and then kind of creates this really interesting dynamic. And that's just something I hadn't really seen in a time loop movie before, because again, generally you're with the person as they're first discovering the time loop. On that note, another thing that's cool about Palm Springs is that there's actually a third character who's in the time loop, which I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before, where like there's this third guy and he's kind of angry at one of the people, but he's going on his own journey at the same time, and he starts the time loop at like a different location. So sometimes he comes to visit Niles and sometimes he doesn't. And I thought that was really interesting because you're basically seeing three completely different characters and they're all kind of dealing with the time loop in their own ways, and it makes you realize like, yeah, each one of us, if we were trapped in a similar situation, we would deal with it in different ways as well. Palm Springs is also a romantic comedy. Now, other time loop movies have had romantic elements in them. Like Groundhog Day, I don't really think that's a romantic comedy. Dramedy, maybe? I'm also thinking of like Happy Death Day. I mean, that had kind of a romance at the center of it as well. Even Russian Doll has some romantic elements, although I think of Russian Doll more as like a horror movie than I do a romantic comedy. But it's been a while since I've seen like a time loop that was just a straight up romantic comedy where both people are trapped inside. And you get to see how this dynamic of them being trapped plays out in really interesting ways. Honestly, the movie it reminded me most of was Passengers, that movie with Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence where they're kind of trapped on a ship and they have like secrets that they haven't told each other. Both Passengers and Palm Springs deal with this idea that these two characters are trapped in this pretty terrible predicament and one of them's kind of responsible for the other one being trapped in it. And what responsibilities does that create? What conflicts does that create? I think both movies deal with that issue in a really interesting fashion. And I really liked how that played out in Palm Springs because the characters go through different stages. You know, Kristen Milioti's character, Sarah, initially is like really angry and puzzled, and then she is resigned and they find some joy in it as well. And it just really shows you the full panoply of human experience through these time loops. And I really appreciated Palm Springs for that. Of course, another thing Palm Springs does is the characters try to science their way out of the time loop, which on the one hand, I really enjoyed the idea of like, if you have so much time, you could just learn quantum physics, and the movie kind of brings that to life in a really funny way with this montage where Sarah's kind of, reading all these books and Skyping all these people. Like, that was cool. I enjoyed that. But, the science just feels really, really thin in this movie. I didn't really believe that there was any solid quantum mechanics basis behind it. Maybe there is, I don't know, but it just didn't feel like the movie paid that much attention to it. But there definitely have been other movies where like in every one of these time loop movies, characters try to figure out how to get out of the situation. Another movie where the characters try to science their way out of it is like Live, Die, Repeat or Edge of Tomorrow, where there's some kind of biological basis for what Tom Cruise's character is going through. But yeah, it's worth noting that there's kind of like two broad categories of time loop movies. There's like the moral category where the characters' souls are in peril and they need to do something to redeem themselves. And then there is the sci-fi version where there's some scientific explanation for this time loop. And in general, like the sci-fi ones are just like, I don't know. I don't think you need to waste your time with that. But this is a movie that does do that. I appreciated that they needed to get them out of the time loop somehow. And they went with a sci-fi route, and I don't know if that's the route I would have gone, but the movie overall is still pretty successful for me. But the one thing that Palm Springs does that I really appreciate is it gets at the idea that life itself is its own existential hell. And I know that many other movies do this, like Groundhog Day specifically does a really great job of this, but it didn't really hit home with me until I saw this movie, specifically during the global pandemic and while living in quarantine. The characters during the movie ask the question, why does any of this matter? Our actions have zero consequences whatsoever. Every day is the same. Everything just resets itself anyway. And certainly living in today's day and age, I definitely feel that. Living in a pandemic, I'm lucky enough to be working from home, but every day is just the same thing. There are people dying because of a complete vacuum of leadership at the state and federal level in many areas around the United States. And it can be very easy to feel like our lives have no consequence, our actions have no consequences, we're trapped in this purgatory and we cannot get out. But the one thing that Palm Springs made me realize is that life is a never-ending series of similar days in which your actions have no consequence, but all we have is each other. And you are extremely lucky if you can find a person or persons to go through this hellscape with. And I think that camaraderie and friendship can come in many different forms. It can be friends you have in real life. It can be a spouse or significant other. It can also be like a Facebook group or a subreddit or a Twitter community or something like that. But we're just all really lucky if we have people to go through all this with. And ultimately, that's what I took away from Palm Springs. And I don't know that I've watched any other time loop movie that made me feel that way so acutely. So for me, that's the biggest innovation that Palm Springs brings to the time loop genre, is that it ties the idea of time loops back to human existence in a really acute fashion, given what we're going through right now. All right, that's what I have to say about Palm Springs, but I'd love to hear what you think about the movie. Did you think it added substantially to the time loop genre? Did you think it was better than Groundhog Day, which some people have been saying? I don't think so. Feel free to hit me up in the comments, let me know what you thought of the movie, and if you enjoyed this video, I'm trying to make way more videos, just like kind of short, quick hit videos like this. I'll be making a bunch more throughout the year. Hit like or subscribe, and make sure you hit the bell icon. That's the only way you're going to get notified if I make a new video. Otherwise, it'll just be lost in YouTube's algorithm. So thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.